So, hi, welcome. I'm Clarie. I worship at the Cotton site. And I thought today it'd be really great if we could have a chat about anxiety and about how it's affecting us. And in order to do that, I really wanted to do this as part of a conversation with my really good friend Julia, who is here with us now. Thank you, Julia. And we're, yeah, just going to say hi to each other, catch up, and then have a bit of a chat about anxiety and about how it's going. So, Julia, how are you doing at the moment?
Nice to see you, Clarie. Clarie, I would say it's felt a bit up and down. I
Yeah,
can't quite believe that we're about 8 weeks
I
into
know.
lockdown.
Yeah.
And I certainly have moments in which I feel very, at peace with the way
Mhm.
things are. And then I have moments when I feel distinctly glum. And I've had times when I've had sort of vividly kind of anxiety provoking dreams. So
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think it's been a real mix.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I definitely hear that, and like having those moments as well. I feel like generally day to day. I mean, I'm really busy. I've got the children at home, and life is much busier now, and I don't really have much time to pause or do any of the things I thought I might do on lockdown. Um, But occasionally there'll be moments where I'll hear something on the news, or we'll have church, or something will happen, and I will just have that almost that overwhelm of the situation, and that kind of really hits me, and I get quite wobbly and quite uncertain about everything, and feel quite sad about everything, and it takes me some time to then get myself back onto an even keel and carry on with the day and move on. So yeah, those ups and downs, it's definitely something I get.
I really hear that, Clary. And of course, you and I both work in mental health.
Yeah,
And we thought it would be good to just share some of our experiences
yeah.
in working with people who are often anxious
Hmm.
and feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I wonder what you've noticed is different between your normal work with people who are struggling with anxiety and the sorts of feelings that are coming up at this time of global pandemic.
I think that is a really interesting question. I mean, often I work with people who've got what we call an anxiety disorder, and that's where they are probably they're reacting, and their body's reacting to what they perceive to be anxious, to the perceived threat or to the perceived uncertainty. And often there's a feeling that's out of sync, so their reactions are stronger, or their anxiety is stronger than the real life situation they're in warrants it to be. And that's why people come to therapy, because they're feeling more anxious or they're more worried than they feel they need to be. And I think what's really noticeable is that in this pandemic, we're in this time where it's genuinely anxiety provoking. Actually, there's a very real threat. And for some people, that's a real threat of life. There's a very real threat of security, of finances, of health. And there's also very real and actual uncertainty. So it's not just that we're perceiving life as uncertain, life is genuinely uncertain. We don't know the answer to loads of our questions. We don't know if there'll be a vaccine. We don't know when the children will go to school. And I think another thing is the idea of control,
Mm.
and the sense that, often in work we're talking about, well, what's in my control and what's outside of my control. And what we're noticing in this pandemic is actually lots and lots of things that are completely outside of our control. Things that
Mm.
used to be in our control, like when we go into someone else's house, or when we meet with our church in a building,
Mm.
or even if we send our children to school or homeschool them, that is no longer a question
Yeah.
or choice in my control.
I really hear that, Clary. So, as you say, often we're encouraging people to accept the limits of their ability to
Yeah,
control things. But at the moment, there are a lot of things that ordinarily we would have more control over that we don't.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm wondering, in your experience, what does living with this extent of uncertainty tend to feel like? How do people describe that, their experience of uncertainty?
Yeah, so people tend to feel very overwhelmed, feel very confused, that there's a feeling, an out of control feeling. And and not so much, but when you prompt people and say, well, how does that feel in your body? Actually, people are reporting lots of things like tension, so lots of headaches or aches and pains, stomach upsets, I mean, even chest pains or heart palpitations. People kind of noticing and feeling all of those sensations in their body quite a lot when they're feeling uncertain and when they're feeling out of control.
So it sounds almost as if the whole body is kind of in a state of anxious alarm or
Yeah,
anxious alert.
and I think that's really interesting for us as Christians, because obviously the Bible tells us lots of times don't be anxious. And I think, I mean, how would you weigh up that kind of command of don't be anxious with the fact that our bodies feel anxious?
Yeah, it comes up so much, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I think I find it really helpful to draw the distinction between a feeling or an emotion, or even a physical bodily sensation, and the behavior of worrying. So feelings, emotions, and bodily sensations are not within our control.
Yeah.
So I often say to people, you know, who would put up their hand and say, I want to feel anxious? Like, we don't choose that.
No.
It's the feeling that just comes up. And in fact, it can be a helpful feeling if it prompts us to take action to avoid real threats. So it's normal and it can have a really helpful purpose. And I think from a Christian point of view, you know, it's part of how we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We're made as emotional beings that experience a whole array of different emotions. So it's totally okay to have a feeling, and trying not to feel a certain emotion would be as futile as trying to keep your pulse at a very specific rate.
Yeah.
It's just not doable. So I think that's the bit that's entirely normal. I think the important distinction to make is between a feeling of anxiety and getting caught up in the kind of work of worry.
Yeah.
Which I would say is more of something that you do, a behavior, and therefore something that you can have some degree of control over. So again, I'd say a really important distinction that we all sometimes have what if thoughts, you know, what if I left the oven on? Totally normal. And I think important to differentiate between then getting pulled into thinking down worrying trains of thought, which I would describe as the process of worrying.
So with that, it sounds like actually in this time of being in a global pandemic, feeling anxious is actually a really normal response, and actually even possibly a helpful response, because it reminds us to do the things that we need to do, like wash our hands and stay socially distant and that. But then one of the challenges comes kind of almost how we respond to that feeling, and whether we end up worrying lots and going over and over things in our head. And if that's, I mean, I guess that's one of the unhelpful responses that we can have to anxiety. I mean, what other unhelpful responses are you noticing in people at this time?
So I'd say there are two sort of broad categories of things that we can do when that feeling of anxiety is around. And as you mentioned, the one is kind of turning towards it, getting really caught up in worrying trains of thought. And a term that people often use is catastrophizing.
Yeah.
The idea of just imagining the worst possible case scenario, if the worst possible thing happens. Or really pursuing a particular worrying train of thought to its inevitable final destination, which is not a good place to be. And I think the problem with that, of course, is that it tends to leave people feeling more anxious and hopeless. And it's almost as if you can start to live in some sort of mental war zone. So that's definitely one of the things.
And quite tiring as well, isn't it? When you're if your brain's always doing that and you're always thinking 20 steps ahead, that it's exhausting just to be in that brain
Absolutely.
space all the
It's
time.
exhausting. It's exhausting. And we've talked about feelings and body sensations. And of course, if you're thinking worst case scenarios, then often it does go along with your body feeling quite tense. And then all the physical symptoms that you were describing. So absolutely. And then I think the other thing is just focusing more and more attention on possible sources of threat, just becoming totally preoccupied, tuning in, giving huge attention, monitoring. And one of the things I like to think of is that whatever we pay attention to gets bigger.
Yes.
It grows. So if you are consistently paying attention to sources of threat, they are going to get bigger in your mind's eye. So again, that can be a really unhelpful thing to be doing. Again, just likely to make you feel more anxious and fearful.
So we can be catastrophizing and worrying, we can be really preoccupied. Are there any other ways in which we're kind of turning towards that anxiety?
So I would say that those are the main ways in which I think we turn towards it. But there's another category of things that we can do that might also be unhelpful. And that's that we can almost get into battle with trying to push our anxious feelings and thoughts away.
Well, they're unpleasant, aren't they? I think. I mean, we don't want to feel them, so.
It's so understandable. I think it's about, what we might do to try to ignore or push away anxious thoughts and feelings that then becomes problematic, because a very common strategy, and that's something that I recognize in myself, is just getting busy. Thinking that you can kind of outrun your fears by just getting super busy. But of course, that then has its own consequences, because at some point you're going to be stopped short in your tracks. You're going to be exhausted. You can't outrun your fears, and they will resurface often when you stop at the end of the day, when you're then exhausted and less able to deal with them. So getting super busy as a way of trying to squeeze out or distract away from fears and worries, I'd say, is unhelpful. And I think just distraction sometimes can be unhelpful, because life can then become a series of distractions away from difficult feelings. And we don't want our life to be a series of distractions. We want to really be living our life doing the things that are most important and meaningful to us. And then probably the final behavior that comes to mind for me in that category is just trying to sort of, almost numb feelings through sleeping or comfort eating or comfort Netflix watching. Doing things again to try to sort of get away from difficult feelings.
So sounds like there's really almost like a value in recognizing that we're anxious and recognizing that being anxious at this time is really normal, and to a certain extent being able to almost sit with that anxiety, being able to just say, do you know what, yes, my body is feeling like this, yes, my brain is doing this, yes, this is part of life at the moment, it is an anxiety provoking time, and this is part of life, and I don't need to run from that feeling, I don't need to hide from that feeling, I don't need to push that feeling out. But I guess on the other side, for so many of us, that feeling then becomes the overwhelm thing. It becomes the thing that we can't deal with, or it becomes too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And Clarie, I wondered if you wanted to just offer some more thoughts about becoming more preoccupied by thoughts of coronavirus and all the uncertainties it brings.
I really liked it when you were saying about that idea of preoccupying, and that idea of what we fill our brains with is the thing that becomes the most important to us. And I think one of the most helpful things, the most healthy things we can do for ourselves at the moment is to manage that, to manage the amount of information that's coming in, because we've got this constant 24-hour news feed of coronavirus, and it's very easily everything that we talk about because we're not doing anything else, and it's everything that we're getting in on every form of media. And I guess it doesn't feel healthy, and it feels like it's always anxiety provoking. And perhaps it's about having a balance of what we fill our minds with. Yes, there's a level to which we need to know what's going on. We need to know the instructions that we're meant to be obeying. We need to recognise the reality of the situation we're in. We can't deny it. We wouldn't want to. But actually, there's so many other things that we can be filling our minds with. You know, there's a whole world outside where things are growing and the seasons are passing and things are changing. There's all of God's word, which is constant and familiar and secure and the same, and isn't this new to constantly be processing. Do you know, there's my family, do you know, the people I'm living with, actually genuinely giving some of my attention, my full attention, to the people in my own home, or the people who I'm connecting with. And it feels like if we can balance kind of what is going into our minds, then that can help to deal with some of that anxiety provoking news stream that we're getting all the time, and that is provoking some of these overwhelmed and anxious feelings.
Clarie, what really strikes me in what you're saying is that in a way the antidote is what is actually happening in my life right now.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, you describe your family and what's happening out there this beautiful time of year. So there's something about being a little bit more present to what is in our lives at the moment. That sounds like it's hugely helpful.
Yeah, for me, I know actually just switching off the devices, or actually I try and just have, you know, one time of day when I check in on the news, and leave it the rest of the time. And the times when I do get most unbalanced actually are when I've kind of let myself go a little bit with that, and I'm starting to read things every hour, and I'm starting to obsessively check up on things, and that's when I kind of get knocked off my perch most, I think, for myself.
Clarie, I'm wondering what else you would recommend, you know, even if there were just a handful of kind of top tips of really useful strategies that people could use. Yeah,
so definitely I think the first one is that managing the information and being really, you know, sensible around what we're allowing in and out of our brains. And I think the second really big thing is this idea of rhythms and routines and feeling secure. And actually a lot of our feeling safe isn't necessarily about weighing up and measuring information. A lot of our feeling safe is just from rhythm and routines of life. And whether that's eating comfort foods that you used to eat as a child that made you feel safe, whether that's having a Sunday morning as a regular worship slot, or making a distinction in your week between kind of when you're in work day and when you're in evening mode. And all of these things are trickier because a lot of us are online all the time and there's a lot more flexibility. But having some of those normal rhythms and those normal routines and keeping everything just comfortable and samey, I think actually makes us feel a lot more safe than we expect it to, and can help us to manage that anxiety, or at least decrease those anxiety feelings so they don't feel like they're going to overwhelm us. So I think that's probably my second really key one. Thirdly, I think talking about it. I mean, we all feel this, don't we? It's not just us, I hope. But actually just being honest with each other, having people we can be honest with and say, look, I'm getting anxious about this, or I'm worrying about this, and being honest before God with it as well. You know, in the Bible we're told so many times, aren't we, to take our anxieties to God, and actually he is the one who can hold those fears, and he can hold those anxieties, and he is the one who is in control, where we're not. Very realistically, we're not in control, but actually he is, and actually he does know the answers to the questions like, when are my children back at school, and when am I meeting up with my church again, you know. And I can't know those answers, and no other human being can know those answers, but God does. And then finally, I think, coming back to that idea we were talking about at the beginning of control again, and knowing what is in my control and what is not in my control. And yes, a lot is not in my control, but actually if I can be real about that, and bring that to God and talk about that and rest in the fact that he is in control. And I was really thinking the other day, I was really struck by actually part of what this pandemic's doing. I think it's almost stripping away the veneer of control. Like, I think I'm in control quite a lot. I think I try and be in control quite a lot, and I try and organize my life to suit me quite a lot. But fundamentally, I don't know from one moment to the next if I'm going to be alive or dead, you know, but God does.
Yes.
And so my illusion of control has been stripped away. But as a Christian, I'm coming back to the fact that whilst my illusion of control is stripped away, the one who genuinely is control is still in control.
Yeah.
And that's where my certainty and my security rests, not in any feelings of control that I may have had before this point.
Yeah. Clarie, that makes me think of Tim Keller describing peace as a confidence and rest in the wisdom and control of God.
Yes.
Yeah. And I love that, because it's saying it's not a feeling, it's in a way a choice that one makes, or an acknowledgement that our all-wise God is sovereignly in control.
Yeah.
And that the fruit of that is peace.
Yeah. Something outside of ourselves and our current situations, regardless of what those current situations are.
Yeah. So good to exchange some ideas with you, Clarie.
Oh, it's been great. Thank you. It's really thought-provoking.
Brilliant. We may have to do it again.
Yes. So, I hope everyone else has found that useful as well, and maybe there'll be something from that you can take away and you can put into place for your life. Obviously, if anybody is really struggling or they're finding their anxieties are getting overwhelming, then City Church does have a pastoral care team, and we would absolutely love to be in contact with you and pray with you and support you in whatever way you need. So do give the office a call or an email if there's anything that you need.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.